Hi there and welcome to this lecture about ancient Greece. My name is Marcus Henriksson and I'm a history teacher here in Sweden. Let's begin with the first great civilization, that is the Minoan Crete. Knossos is possibly Europe's oldest city. It is at least from around 5000 BC, that is 7000 years ago. And we know for a fact that around 2000 BC it had about 18,000 inhabitants. But only 300 years later it had as many as 100,000. We also know from excavations and so on that they had an advanced agricultural and water system. We also know that they used colors for clothes and that they were really skilled at pottery and had a large trading system that was connected with other civilizations and cities. We know that they used to buy copper and tin in order to make and produce bronze, both jewelry and weapons. And we know that they created a gigantic temple complex. And this temple complex also contained the labyrinth. But there are many things that we don't know about this civilization. Men and women's position, for example. Who ruled the kingdom? Was it some kind of chieftain or king? Was it a democracy? We don't know. We do, however, know that they mainly worshipped female gods. So how did the Minoan civilization go under? Well, we know for a fact that it perished around 1450 BC, most likely due to a volcanic eruption, when large part of the ancient civilization sank into the sea. And historians and archaeologists believe that this have also created the legend of Atlantis. But it could have been possible that Pluto was talking about the island of Santorini, which is also an island in the middle of the Mediterranean that had a highly developed culture during this time. And the same thing happened with this civilization as with Crete. That is a large volcanic eruption that caused a large part of the island to be destroyed. But after Minoan Crete, we have a new great Greek civilization, that is Mycenaean culture and civilization, which covered a large part of modern Greece. This culture lasted several hundred years during the so-called Bronze Age. And the most famous king they had was Agamemnon. According to books like the Iliad and the Odyssey, Agamemnon waged a war against a city in today's Greece, that is Troy. Most historians today believe that this war have happened. But how this civilization went under, we don't really know. There are various theories on this subject. They could have been conquered by the sea peoples or pirates. If the sea peoples came from the Mediterranean islands, perhaps such as Sicily or Corsica, it is possible. They could also have come from, let's say, Sweden or Denmark. But it could also have been some kind of natural disaster or climate change. After that civilization, we can see the so-called Greek city-states around 800 BC. But you should know that there were several hundred different small states, but the largest ones were Sparta and Athens. Sparta was ruled by 2 kings to avoid a dictatorship. Otherwise, it was a democracy. All Spartan men were raised to be soldiers, and everybody who underwent the military training were then given the right to vote. But most people in Sparta were not free men, they were slaves, and thus had no right to vote, around 90% of the population. Women also did not have the right to vote. The ideal in Sparta was the perfect soldier who died for his comrades in battle. He was preferably strong, tall, durable, etc. The entire civilization of Sparta revolved around the possible creation of perfect soldiers, as many as possible, in order to create a strong civilization. So what happened to the ones that didn't fit in? Well, according to myth and legend, they were thrown among the rocks. Historians and archaeologists today don't believe that. They instead prefer the tale that people didn't throw babies off rocks, but instead left them to die in the wild. The Spartan civilization, as I mentioned before, revolved around creating perfect soldiers. So in order to accomplish this, children around 7 years old started the hard military training called agoge. They were then thrown out into the wild in order to survive without food. They also had to fight each other on certain occasions. And basically they trained day in and day out, year after year, in order to make them harder and stronger. It is also known that around half the men survived this training, and most historians today believe that the agoge training were a lot harder to survive and to finish than modern military training today. Another interesting fact surrounding Sparta was that homosexuality was a must. It was mandatory. All boys were paired up with an older unmarried man who then were both this boy's mentor and personal lover. The Spartan lifestyle was also very different from that of, let's say, Athens, for example. They didn't have any fancy or ornate rooms. Things would not be nice or just, good to look at. Everything was supposedly as practical as possible. The equality in Sparta was a lot better than that of Athens. In Sparta, all the women were counted as citizens with basic rights. They didn't, however, were allowed to fight or vote, but you should know that women in Sparta owned approximately 40% of all the land. Women also got the same food as the men, the same exercise opportunities, the same education opportunities, and so on. They also got to choose when and if they would like to marry. And in the Spartan society we can see a lot more women than men, so women in fact were the norm in this society. The slaves were a must in the Spartan society in order to maintain a good economy. Just like in Athens, slaves were a must. And in Sparta, however, in comparison with Athens, they could receive as much as 50% of what they earned. So slaves and women had it a lot better in Sparta than in Athens. There were also some special laws that only applied in Sparta. Money was in fact forbidden. One would prefer to be naked in Sparta, as this was said to encourage exercise and sexual activities. And adultery didn't exist, as everybody was allowed to sleep to whenever and whoever they liked. The only important thing in Sparta was in fact to create as many strong and healthy children as possible in order to create as many perfect soldiers as possible. Athens, on the other hand, was a lot different from Sparta. First, it was a kingdom ruled by a small elite. Some became super rich and wealthy, and poverty increased rapidly. In order to fix this, the person they picked as their leader was Solon, and he created some kind of dictatorship in order to fix the issues and problems. He abolished the debt system and the people's debt, and then gave back people their land and rights. He also gave all the citizens the right to vote, and from that point forward, Athens was some kind of democracy. Democracy is that the people have all the power and that the people are the rulers. But yeah, everybody wasn't allowed to vote. Basically, it was men above a certain age. According to some historians 18, according to other historians 19, 20 or 21. We can't really know for sure. But we do, however, know that the people in Athens choose their rulers by drawing lots. Bad politicians could be banished. They voted every year, and if some person got 6,000 votes, they were then banished. The quality in Athens were a lot worse than it was in Sparta. Women in Athens were either citizens nor considered equals. They weren't allowed to participate in politics or in the army, just like in Sparta. However, their ownership options were a lot more limited. They also weren't allowed to stay out however they wanted and liked. They weren't given access to education. They weren't given the same food, and so on and so on. Basically, their sole purpose was to take care of the home and the children. The Greeks were good at many things, philosophy for example, Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, and so on. They also were really skilled at building ships, so in order to create as many ships as possible, they sacrificed a great chunk or part of their economy, but this was a really good bet because they could create a large and wide trade system in the Mediterranean and therefore gain a lot more. They also were really skilled at science. The length of the string and the pitch belong together, and this is the first example of an experiment. They also were some kind of multitaskers. They were really good at astronomy, mathematics, medicine, and so on. And a lot of them had really interesting ideas, such as Democritus, who believed that everything consists and was created of atoms. They also produced drama and theater. And they were among the first countries and states in the world to use coins. They had different coins for different cities and kingdoms, often with various gods or city coats of arms or kings. Here is an example from Athens. What Athens and Sparta had in common were slaves who were incredibly important for their economies. Homosexuality was considered to strengthen morality both in Sparta and in Athens. The difference was that in Sparta it was mandatory, but in Athens it was just considered something nice and good. And the Greek gods had an important role in both these city-states. They worshipped a lot of different gods, such as Zeus, the god of the skies or thunder. We have Poseidon, god of the sea, Hades, god of the underworld, and so on and so on. Greece was then threatened by Persia around 492 BC. and they fought different kind of wars. Persia in this time was technically a large giant. They controlled all the way from Turkey all the way to India. And they could muster huge armies. Then we have the Battle of Marathon, where the Persian king Darius was defeated, and a Greek is then said to have run with the news from Marathon to Athens and therefore created the Marathon race. The Persians then attacked again. This time King Xerxes attacked. According to some historians, the Persian army numbered around 1 million. Other historians say between 70 to 300,000. But it was a huge army. There we can see the Battle of Thermopylae, where several thousand Greeks went against the entire Persian army. The Persians eventually won this battle, but the costs were heavy. The Persians then burned down Athens to the ground. But then we have the sea battle of Salamis. The Greeks won. Their triremes were a lot better than the Persian ones. They could navigate a lot more easy due to the fact that they were smaller. And the Greeks also won this battle as well. So how could the Persian army lose? Well, there are many contributing factors, such as the Greeks were better at fighting, they had better equipment, they fought of their own free will and to save their motherland, they know the area better and had better military leaders and strategists. So the Greek won the fight against Persia, but they became a lot weaker. And after that time, Sparta and Athens still battled one another for a lot of the time. They did, however, create a lot of trading cities and colonies in the Mediterranean. But since they fought one another for a long time, they weakened one another as well. And therefore they could then be destroyed and conquered by another one. This person, Alexander the Great from Macedon. The sources I have used for this video lecture are A History of World Societies by John P. Mackay, World History New Perspective by Clyde Ponting, Perspective on History by Lars Hans and Örjan Nyström, SO History by Elisabeth Ivansson, Robert Sandberg and Matthias Turay, Wikipedia Ancient Greece, Ancient.eu Greek Science, some documentaries, Athens, The Spartans Part 1, 2, 3, on Timeline, History Buffs 300, Misunderstood Moments in History, Why the Persians Failed to Conquer Greece, Leonidas of Sparta Biography, The Lost City of Troy, full documentary, A Troubled Island, The Minotaur's Island, Europe's First Civilization, The Minoans, Did the Trojan War Really Happen, Lost World's Troy, Ancient Greek State Politics and Diplomacy, and so on and so on. If you have any questions whatsoever, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. Otherwise, I would like to say have a good day. Bye.